Good evening. You're watching Asian Review, and I'm David Day. We're broadcasting live right from the heart of Bishop Street here in Pioneer Plaza, and we've got a very interesting program for you tonight. We're going to be talking about the implosion or explosion in Thailand. And I know many of you have been watching the events in the Ukraine, and you're going to see some rather interesting or striking parallels between what's going on here right in the heart of our Asia-Pacific region. To help us with this, I would like to introduce my co-host, Maya Reid, who's going to join us for this program. Maya, nice to have you with us.
Great to be here with you. Thank you.
And our special guest, our expert, who is coming back from the streets of Bangkok as a witness to the events, and a senior associate with Pacific Forum CSIS here in Honolulu, Mr. Kerry Gershaneck. And Kerry, welcome home.
Solid decrupt, David and Maya. It's good to be home.
You know, Kerry, this is a really unusual opportunity for ThinkTech. You know, here at Asian Review, if you recall, before you left for Bangkok, we do programs here on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at 4 o'clock, and my compadre Hong Yang does the shows on Tuesdays, and I'm here every Thursday at 4 o'clock. And I'm glad that you could join us, because this is an opportunity for our audience to really begin to understand in some more depth what's been going on in Thailand. Very, very significant. And unfortunately, I don't really think that the global or even our own national media, one, understand it, and two, have given it much coverage at all. And it's a very serious situation. I'm glad that you're here to help us with that.
Well, you're absolutely right, David. The general population of the United States would have a very skewed view of what is really happening in Bangkok at the highest levels, and certainly on the streets of Bangkok, where the majority of the protest is taking place. If they were left to read Time magazine or left to read the Washington Post, because the reporting has been skewed, and frankly, it has not been useful for Americans to understand the context of why what appears to be a democratically elected government is under siege by a very large number of its own population.
Okay, before we get to that, if those of you in the audience, if you caught what Kerry was saying, is that what we're going to do with this show is we're going to peel back this fake veneer of a democracy and really look at what's been going on in Thailand. And I mean, am I overstating it, or?
Thailand's a constitutional democracy. It has the structure, the trappings of a democracy. The regime that is in power, the one that the millions of Thais are in the streets trying to bring down, to end, is doing everything it can to dismantle the actual substance of democracy over there. Every institution that would allow another party to ever rise and challenge it at the ballot box, through vote buying, through a number of other means, legal and extra legal, that is attempting to deconstruct democracy over there. It's a very critical time in Thailand's history. In the lifetime of anyone listening, there has never been a crisis quite like this, for reasons that we'll discuss throughout the show.
Okay. And Maya, how about, why don't you see if you can help us find out, because I'm not so sure that Kerry would actually tell me, but he might tell you something about what caused him to be in those streets.
Yeah, so you just returned from Thailand, and I think you have a really close insight into what has been occurring there right now. So when you were there, what did you observe? You observed many protest rallies, and what have you come back to share with us today?
Well, you're right. I was there for about a little more than 3 months. I'm a university teacher here, and I work for the #1 rated foreign policy and security-related think tank of the world, Pacific Forum, Center for Strategic and International Studies. Took a sabbatical.
Okay.
Went over to teach at the university level, or in Thailand, and its various academic institutions, in fact. in Thailand. And as a result of that, I had access to very senior ranking military officers, very senior ranking national police officers. In Thailand, it is a national police force, not like Hawaii or California, where you have the Honolulu Police Department or the California State Patrol. It's a national police force. And access to a number of very well-informed academics and business leaders. And as a result of that, I got very good insights as to the nature of the protests and the nature of the pro-government forces. I spent, out of the time I was there, with the protesters on the streets, roughly cumulatively about 20 some odd days with the protesters, but then much of the other time was with people who were involved in one way or the other, having dinner, having lunch, talking with them.
Let me see if I understand what you said. You spent roughly 20 days in the streets of Bangkok
At the protest sites.
in the midst of the protesters.
Yes.
Okay. So, Kerry, help us now. What has just happened in terms of developments in Thailand, so that the viewers can place
What's the
this?
most recent?
Yeah.
news?
What's the most recent development here?
The breaking news today, or Thursday Thailand time, was supposed to have been the indictment or the announcement of a probable indictment of Prime Minister Yingluck, is her name. She's the lady who's the Prime Minister of Thailand.
Mr. Control Room, if we could put up while Kerry's talking photograph number 1, if we could do that, that would be great. Okay.
Prime Minister Yingluck has been investigated by the Anti-Corruption Commission. And the announcement was supposed to have been made at 10 o'clock Thursday, Thailand time, 10 a.m., that whether she would be indicted or not, at which point she would have to permanently resign as Prime Minister. Back up a moment. The millions of protesters in the streets forced her to resign as Prime Minister in December, but then she immediately was reinstated as the caretaker Prime Minister. If she's indicted by the Anti-Corruption Commission for a scheme that was worth about 15 to 18 billion dollars U.S., a corruption scheme that involved that much money, she will have to immediately resign. Now, what she has done, though, is she has basically gone in exile. She's a government prepared to go into exile. She flew off to the northern part of Thailand, Chiang Mai area, base of support for her brother, deposed Prime Minister Thaksin, who really is the mastermind behind her and her government.
Hold on a second, Kerry. Here,
Yes.
Control Room. Let's show our audience her older brother, photograph number 2, if we could, just so we see what he looks like there.
So Prime Minister Yingluck has flown north rather than face the Anti-Corruption Commission and the charges. She actually had her thugs, the red shirts, take over the building that the commission works out of, chain it and padlock it so they couldn't go in to do their work and they couldn't make their announcement. She sent her lawyers
Pretty
to talk
primitive
to
strategy.
primitive but effective. And the protesters have done the same
Similar
thing to
things.
government buildings over the past, or since November, almost 4 months. They've done the same thing to government buildings, but this was clear administrative or actual physical obstruction of justice. They didn't want the prime minister they support to be indicted and have to stand down, and she didn't want to be there to face it, so she flew off north to get involved in agricultural dedications rather than face the most serious challenge of her prime minister reign.
So now that she has basically fled to the north, what is the future of Thailand? What does this mean for the future of Thailand and its political regime?
Well, her fleeing north could mean one of two things. One, the indictment was delayed. There was no announcement as the commission met with her lawyers. The expectation is that the announcement will be made in the next few days. If that does happen, her supporters, the supporters of her brother, have promised severely escalated violence. And she has two choices. She can either resign as the Constitution requires her to do, and then another prime minister will be appointed until elections can be held, or she can stay up in Chiang Mai, which is what a lot of people are thinking she will do, and say, no, I'm prime minister. If you don't like it, come get me if you can. But that creates massive problems because the police are very supportive of the government. Her brother, Thaksin, was a police lieutenant colonel before he was getting quite rich as a police lieutenant colonel, which is the nature of being a policeman in Thailand. But then when he got out, he got much more rich through other business schemes. And so the police support Thaksin. They support Yingluck at about 70% of the police force to 30% supporting the protesters. So they probably won't go in to get her if she's indicted. The military faces a very serious problem in that the military is split about 50-50, 50% pro-government, about 50% pro-protest,
Kerry,
pro-democracy.
what's the kind of the bottom line of this situation that we're looking at now in Thailand? Is this a country that's about ready to explode in civil war?
People are talking in terms that you would not have heard 3 to 5 years ago, even though the country, Thaksin was a very divisive person. He was prime minister from 2001 to 2006 when a coup deposed him. But you didn't hear talk of civil war until recently. Now you're hearing talk of partitioning of the country of Thailand. You're seeing divisions that were usually kept at the elites level, at the upper levels of the strata of Thailand. Now those divisions are tearing through the fabric of Thai society, all through all the classes, all the income levels, all the education levels. So the potential for civil war, the potential for really serious violence is very real. And that's why the military is very reluctant to do what has been a historic option in Thailand, that's have a coup and put in a caretaker government or a government until things settle down.
Kind of like the great peacemaker.
Yes.
The great peacemaker with the king always behind, with the monarchy always behind the military. But if they do that this time, it's not fear that America will slap them on the wrist because, oh, you naughty military people, you had a coup. There's minor concern about that, of course, but the real concern is that you may have Thai soldiers turning their rifles on Thai soldiers. You may have Thai tanks firing on Thai tanks.
Because of this 50-50 split in the military.
Because of the divisions in the country now, the political divisions in the country, which again have been brewing for some years, but they have not been this apparent. And you have not heard the talk, the rhetoric, and seen the violence. There's violence, there's terror attacks on an almost daily basis on the protesters.
Maya, let's hold this Thailand situation for a second here, because you know, the ladies and gentlemen, you in the audience, during the tail end of the Sochi Winter Olympics, you saw an explosion take place in the Ukraine, and the Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, exiled. Wasn't Maya? He was exiled to the Crimea first, and then out to Russia.
Crimea first, and then out to Russia. So he also has fled the country in the wake of rampant protests, extreme protests, and with a lot more violence, I think, than Thailand has experienced. But Thailand is still in the wake of very serious issues right now.
Kerry, if we look at the situation in the Ukraine, and then we flip back to Thailand, one of the things is that you know, in the comparison to the two countries, the Ukraine is actually a much poorer country than Thailand is, and it doesn't have the upscale side that Thailand has, nor does it have the foreign investment or foreign investors there. I know that we want to move on in other parts of this program, but I'm really curious, do you see a difference in the potential level of violence and killing that could come in Thailand, different than in the Ukraine because of the Buddhist religion in Thailand? Do you think that has a tampering or restraining effect?
The Thai version of Buddhism is one that would temper much of the violence that you might see in the Ukraine. It's not going to stop a civil war. It won't stop the killing in the streets among certain groups. The vast majority of people in Thailand, they're wonderful people. They're very gentle. They're very forgiving, and the Buddhism is practiced to a degree. 95% of the people are Buddhist. Small percentage, about 4% Muslim, and the rest are Christian and others. It really does have a tempering effect, but again, the groups that would be pulling the triggers, shooting the grenade launchers, firing the tanks, perhaps, have already proven themselves quite capable of killing fellow Thais.
Okay.
So in the past, the King of Thailand and the monarchy has been known to temper protests or temper increasing violence in the streets. What has been the difference now than, say, when the protests began in 2006 and the military had to step in with a coup to remove Thaksin
All right,
from power?
great question. Kerry, I want you to think about the answer to that because we're going to go to our first commercial break. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay with us. You're watching Asian Review, and I'm your host, David Day. We'll see you on the other side of the break.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for ThinkTech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
We're back. We're live. We're broadcasting from Pioneer Plaza here at the core of downtown Honolulu. I'm David Day. You're watching Asian Review, and today's program is about the bloody turmoil and economic crisis that Thailand faces. My co-host here is the lovely Maya Reid. Maya, nice to have you.
Great to be here.
And our man on the streets with the smoke of battle all around him, having returned from Bangkok, and I'm sure he would like to be wearing a yellow shirt if he could, but it's Kerry Gershaneck.
Thank you for having me back, David, but no, I was an observer there.
I
and
understand.
I went in there actually with no preconceived notions as to which side I would back if I was asked to back the side. It's just through extensive discussions with people on both sides of the issue. And again, being with the protesters and finding out that the impressions I got from them from reading, again, the New York or the Washington Post, for example, Time Magazine was dead wrong. This is not just elites, this is people from every strata in Thailand who desperately are seeking to preserve what democracy they have and to make sure that a thug regime does not become the permanent regime that runs their country.
Okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you just joined the program, right before the commercial break, Maya, you asked a very important question of Kerry, and let's handle that question right now. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, so of course, what has been the difference now in the situation in Thailand and the growing violence compared to, say, in 2006 when the military stepped in and had a coup to remove Thaksin from power?
Since Thailand became a constitutional democracy back in 1932, there's been a number of coups. We should be under no illusions that the military hasn't been the predominant force in Thailand for much of that era since 1932, and that when it perceived it necessary for its own purposes, its own privilege, or its perceived national security interest for its country, it stepped in. What's different is that you had the longest reigning monarch of any in the world right now. Bhumibol is revered in the country. He's loved. It's unlike any other country I've been in the world. I just love to see the reverence that the people
And
have
the
for
respect,
the king
yes.
and the Queen Mother for the king. But the king has been hospitalized for 5 years. He's 87 years old. He's been in the throne for 60 years. He doesn't have the strength that he used to have. He was always the force of last resort. The Thai military would get the head nod from him either before or after the coup. The Queen Mother isn't as strong as she was. She's had medical challenges as well. And so that force isn't as strong in guiding the country as it has been. And it's not publicly discussed much in Thailand. The military is very, very cautious, as I indicated last segment, because in the past, the military saw the problems, saw the country's national security interests, stepped in. Now the national security interests are not as clear to all of the military as was in the past, because the country, as we discussed last segment, is riven. It is split.
So divided.
So divided politically. So the military, as a reflection of society, with conscripts and officers from all over the nation, is split. So the military has to take careful consideration. General Prayut, who's actually the chief of the army, but he's the most powerful general in Thailand. He has to be extremely careful, because if he takes military action, he has to be prepared that maybe some of his soldiers fire on other soldiers. Okay, that there is fighting within his own ranks. So it's a different scenario. Everyone is being extremely cautious right now.
So, Kerry, are you saying that the king, given his age, his health, really does not carry the same peacemaking, or the concern in Thailand is he may not carry the same peacemaking firepower that he once had?
The king physically is not as strong as he used to be, and so the Privy Council, without getting into all the names of all the organizations, because this whole show could become just nomenclature discussion, who's got what titles. But there is a group called the Privy Council that acts in the king's name. So there are people who could still act in the king's name. The king certainly can engage, but it's not at the same level. At least that's what the perception is. Everything I'm reporting, incidentally, on the show is perceptions that I'm sharing.
I understand. Sure.
There's that perception, and so it was what you are alluding to, David. The health issues and other issues. There were two main causes of the protests going to the streets, the millions of Thais hitting the streets in November. The American public probably knows of one, and that was the amnesty bill for Thaksin that Prime Minister Ingluck tried to ram through.
And we'll get to that later in the show.
Right. But the other that caused a great number of people in power and a great number of Thais to actually take to the streets in November, that is not spoken about much, is the deep concern of the king's health and what comes next in the monarchy. And they think time is running out for their country.
Fear of the unknown.
Their fear of what they may know, and also that time is running out for them to ever save their democracy for their country.
I understand.
And that's why the explosion, the people going to the streets in November when I got off the plane, and why it's escalating to the point that it's escalated to today.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know, let me tell you that ThinkTech produces 4 new shows every day right here on this channel, and those shows are put into a queue that runs 24/7 at thinktechhawaii.com. And for our shows here at ThinkTech, you can contact us on Twitter at ThinkTechHi, ThinkTechi, or you can email us at talk@thinktechhawaii.com. And one of the things you can do, if you apply, you might get accepted to be able to watch one of our shows live in our studio audience. And so today we have someone who has done that, and I understand we have a question for you, Kerry. And so let me ask this this young woman if she would give her first name and the country of origin where she's from. Okay, just your first name.
Hello, hi David, hi Kerry and Maya. My name is Loan from Vietnam.
Okay.
I would like to have 2 small questions to Kerry. The first question is that what's going on in Thailand is right now is just so-called bloody conflict, bloody issues happening, and it's quite violent, and I'm too scared and I don't have the courage to be there this moment, and I'm really impressed why Kerry you were there for 3 weeks, and for what, and what is your role, and who other invitation from the Thailand's people government or from CSIS Pacific Forum request, and what is your role there, and I'm really curious to learn about that. And second question is that you are from the CSIS Forum, Pacific Forum. What is your point of view in terms of For example, the U.S. government and U.S. military urge U.S. On behalf of the CSIS and PAC Forum raise a point or propose any solution recommendations to the U.S. government in order for them to help out and identify a good solution for this internal turmoil in Thailand.
Okay.
Thank you.
So our studio audience has asked two questions, Kerry. The first question is just short answers to both. Really, what caused you to go to this bloody, violent location? Because was the protest started when you left Honolulu here?
Okay, since I got asked multiple questions, I'll answer them
And
as
then the
I see
second-
fit.
and
And
the
that's
second
the second
question-
one is what role can the U.S. play in helping to resolve the problem? Okay, again, rule of thumb is when you're being interviewed, you get to answer multiple questions in the order you want to answer them and which ones you want to answer. So I'm going to start with what can the U.S. do? Ambassador Kenny, Christy Kenny, is a wonderful ambassador for the United States in Bangkok, but in reality, the United States is constrained. This is an internal political issue.
Right.
What Ambassador Kenny, what the United States can do is pretty much what we've done. We've cautioned a restraint. We have called for an end to the violence. The UN has done the same thing. The European Union has done the same thing. Everyone is asking for restraint and lack of violence. But if the U.S. is perceived as getting involved in the political face-off over there, what is becoming increasingly violent, then the U.S. takes on the role of the bad guy. And quite frankly, another issue that we have to face up to is America is actually not quite as influential as we were at one time with Thailand. We're treaty allies. We have the longest standing alliance with any country in Asia with the Kingdom of Siam, with Thailand. Goes back 180 years, and we've had a security treaty there since 1954. So we've had a very close relationship. It's one of 5 treaty allies with the United States in Asia. But we cannot be seen as interfering with the internal politics. When Christy Kenny, when Ambassador Kenny made even the vaguest references to the protests or to issues surrounding it, she was immediately labeled as taking sides. So America has to be seen as not taking sides and letting the political evolution go as it can. The U.S. military has no role other than to try to caution its counterparts. Please, you realize that if you have a coup, that we're going to have to cut off aid like we did in 2006 and 1992 and all the other coups. Our legislation requires that. Your training, a lot of the other aid we give, we're going to have to cut off. Please don't have a coup. Democratic countries, the militaries don't do that. But the reality is that our influence is limited. We don't have nearly the influence there or in Asia, perhaps parts of Asia that we used to have. Now, as far as you describe a very bloody, very dangerous place, the reality is, yes, 4-year-olds are being murdered, 5-year-olds are being murdered, 6 years old, and their parents
Kerry,
are being killed, but it wasn't that dangerous.
Hold 1 second. Control room, could you show us photograph number 3, please? Okay, and so this is one side of what's going on here.
Tear gas, water cannons by the police and the protesters.
And then control room, could you show us photograph number 10, please? And this is maybe the flip side of the protest there. Why don't you?
These are the protesters. These are my pictures. I have more than 1,000 pictures that I've taken of the protests.
What's happening here with this picture?
It is. The whistle is the symbol. The whistle and the flag of Thailand is the symbol of the protesters. Very clever in terms of the propaganda side of the reform protest movement is to have usurped, to taken on the flag of your country as the symbol, the colors of your protest. And so everybody wears the triumph flag colors to show that they are with the reform protest. But the whistle has become the preeminent symbol. At rallies, you get tired clapping. At rallies, you get tired cheering or yelling, but everyone can blow whistles. And so when Prime Minister Yingluck left Bangkok the other day, she said one of the reasons that she was leaving was because she was being hounded by the protesters and they were blowing the whistles and she couldn't, and she was implying she couldn't think. So she needed to get away and go up north just before she was to have her, whether she would be indicted or not, announced to her. But what you see is a family, and many people from Thailand of all classes, all education levels, bring their families to the protest sites.
Control room photograph number 6, if I could, please.
And some of those children get killed. These are also pictures I've taken of, this was the day that the protesters had, they tried to get 10 million out on the streets of Bangkok. There's 3.5 to 6 million, if anyone who understands imagery interpretation and can count would know that there were numbers in that area. The police, which are pro-Tox and pro-Yingluck, they put out an estimate of 275,000 total in Bangkok that day, but there was really about 3.5 to 6 million. Now, what does that mean? For Americans, we're about 4.7 times the size of the population of Thailand. That means that we would have had somewhere between 18 and 26 million people marching on Washington, D.C., protesting in the streets of Washington, D.C.
Which
on
would
a
have been
proportional basis
incredible.
against the current government in D.C. It's an astounding turnout. So to have between 3.5 and 6 million people to go out on the streets of Bangkok to say that we want democracy, we want the form and substance of democracy, not just the form of democracy. Yes, you got there by elections, but they contend and they can prove that vote buying is rampant.
We got to go to a commercial break, but before we do, let me ask you a real short question. The sound of the whistle, is that symbolic of the people being whistleblowers?
No, the sound of the whistle is simply to make noise, to be heard, and to do it in a way that doesn't ruin your larynx for the rest of the day or the week.
We'll be back with Kerry Gershaneck and my co-host Maya Reid after the break. Stay with us.
Castle and Cook, Hawaii. Investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state. Collateral Analytics, empowering the real estate industry to make better informed property investment decisions. The Foreign Trade Zone, bringing the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone programs to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. Galen Ho, a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company. Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island. The Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, incorporating diverse perspectives to design a flexible and forward-looking energy strategy. Hawaii Energy, the state's energy and efficiency program created to help Hawaii's residents and businesses adopt a clean energy lifestyle. Hawaii Gas, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future. Hawaii Pacific Health, bringing technology and teamwork together to transform healthcare in Hawaii. The High Tech Development Corporation, attached to DBED, is the state's leading technology agency. The SHIDLER Family Foundation, supporting educational, cultural, and charitable organizations, including ThinkTech.
We're back. You're watching Asian Review right here on ThinkTech. I'm your host, David Day, and I'm very blessed today to have as a co-host Maya Reid. And Maya, it's great to have you, and I hope you'll join us for other shows.
I will, of course.
And both Maya and I are tickled to death to have a man who's come back from the streets of Thailand with smoke of battle and protest all over him, Mr. Kerry Gershaneck, who's a senior associate at Pacific Forum CSIS. And great to have you back, Kerry.
Thank you, David. Maya, good to be here.
Great. So in this next section, we want to talk about the root of the problem and the root of why millions of Thai protesters are coming out into the streets and making their voices be heard. So what is at the root of this conflict? And you talked a little bit about corruption earlier in the show. So how has corruption and the loss of democracy really affected Thailand and its people?
It's all about legitimacy, Maya. It's in the eyes of the protesters. In the eyes of the protesters, the Yingluck government is hopelessly, irredeemably corrupt and incompetent. They lived through her brother's rule from 2001 to 2006. The military put out her brother. They had a coup to get rid of him because he was increasingly authoritarian. There was a great deal of corruption under his rule, to the point that when he was deposed by a coup, the government recapped somewhere in the realm of 1.2 billion that he had gotten through corrupt means. $1.2 billion from his
US?
account. That's not all of it. That's U.S. dollars.
U.S. dollars.
And so when his sister, through a variety of mechanisms that appear democratic, that were enough to have fooled the Washington Post and Time Magazine and others, veneer of democracy with the thin veil. Prime Minister in-luck took power as prime minister. It was all towards the purpose. She was basically, in the eyes of the protesters, a puppet of her big brother. So she basically validated that suspicion when she, with the parliament, we have a Congress, they have a parliament on the British system, tried to pass a law that would allow her brother, who faced 2 years in prison if he did come back to Thailand, to not only come back and be totally free of all charges, total amnesty for him, but it would have been a reimbursement of the $1.2 billion with a great deal of interest.
Wow.
And so he would have been, he's already powerful and rich, but he would have had that in his
That's the
drawer as
people's
well.
money today.
It's the people's money today, money that it was taken from him, confiscated when he was deposed because he got it through corrupt means. He basically, in effect, stole it. So the issue in the eyes of the protesters is a government that, like its predecessor, the Thaksin regime, which became increasingly authoritarian. There were hundreds of extrajudicial killings under the Thaksin regime, especially down south, of people who were opposed to the central government in Bangkok, and a great deal of corruption, and I can give many examples of that kind of corruption. But it was carried over into this regime. We talked about the $15 to $18 billion rice scheme that we'll talk about a little bit more, but that was just one of many. That was the most egregious.
Well, let's talk about
But
that
there were
now.
many other scandals
Yeah,
as
let's
well.
talk about this rice scheme. And
Yes.
Control Room, can we please bring up photo number 5?
Photo number 5.
Yes. Okay. So what are we looking at, and what's the significance of these piles and piles of rice that are being basically stored in warehouses right now under the Thai government?
It was basically a massive vote buying scheme.
Really? That's vote buying?
That's vote buying. Thailand's an agrarian country. It's agriculture. There's many factories got that, but mainly it's historically been agricultural, and rice farming is huge. And so Thaksin's base of support was the Northeast, which is they raise livestock, and then the rest of the country where they grow wonderful fruits, vegetables, but rice is very big. The way to get the votes of the rice farmers under Ingluk's government, Prime Minister Ingluk's government, the
But it
rice
can't be
buying
to give
scheme.
them a sack of rice. That's not the deal,
You
right?
don't get a rice farmer to vote for you by giving him a sack of rice. You give him 40% more than the rice is worth on the open market. That's how they did it. You vote for Ingluk, and Ingluk will give you 40% more for your bag of rice, rice farmer, than you could get on the international
Commonly
market.
known as a bribe, right?
And of course, the
buying.
taxpayer,
Yeah.
the Thai taxpayer, foots the bill. So what you see there is a little bit unusual. There's a lot of warehouses that are empty.
Let's go back to that photograph, Control Room number
You
5.
see a full. You see what appears to be a lot of rice bags. And the rice that they're buying, number one, when they check the rice, it usually isn't the quality that the government was supposed to be buying. It's much lower quality. And in other cases, they check the warehouses where the rice was supposed to be bought and stored and then resold on the world market so the government could recoup the money. Most of those, or many of those warehouses have very little rice.
Well, did the farmers get paid the 40% bonus?
Not all of them have, and that's why the farmers now are turning against the government. When the protest forced Prime Minister Ingluk to resign and the whole parliament to be dissolved in December, she was immediately reinstated as the, quote, caretaker government. Caretaker prime minister with a caretaker government with the cabinet leaders. But she has power, but she has no power to raise money. And as a caretaker prime minister. And so now they're trying to strong arm banks to loan the government the money to pay the farmers of a bag of rice. This is a bad example, but let's use it because it's simple. Let's say a bag of rice costs $100. Well, they were paying $140 for the bag of rice.
No. Just be precise now. They promised to pay.
They promised to pay
$140 for a $100 bag of rice.
Yes.
Okay. So if Maya's the rice farmer,
Yes.
I'm going to promise her $140 for a $100 bag of rice.
Yes.
She gives me the bag of rice.
Maybe, but
Possibly.
sometimes.
If I agree,
she like,
yes.
but
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so she votes for me. I got her vote in theory,
Yep.
right?
And he stores the rice
I'm
in
storing
these
the rice,
warehouses.
Yes.
the Thai government. Now, what am I supposed to do with this rice? What's the end of the transaction? I don't get it.
the Thai taxpayer was told the government would turn around and sell the rice on the world market and recoup that money for the government coffers.
How can the Thai government possibly sell rice on the open
$140.
at $140 when the market is $100?
And also when there's other countries
Competing
such as
for that.
Vietnam that have lower prices
You're
and
asking
better
me to get
quality.
into the head of Prime Minister Ingluck and her cabinet and
Okay.
try to defend that. I can't,
Yeah.
and she can't either, which is why
Which
she
means
almost
they
got
won't,
into-
they
or
can't sell that rice, correct?
They could, but at a huge loss.
Okay, so let's say,
They could.
or help us with
rice
this.
is cheaper elsewhere in
Okay,
Asia.
but help us with this, Kerry.
Yes.
Suppose I'm the Thai government now. We've gone through the scenario.
Yes.
Maya's the farmer. I bought the rice from Maya.
Yes.
And so she's expecting $140. I've just promised it. She's voted for me.
Yes.
She's ticked off because she hasn't got her $140 yet, right?
Right.
I got the rice in my warehouse. The market price is $100, but maybe I gotta sell it cheap. So eventually I move it out of that government warehouse that we just saw a picture of, and I only get $90. So how am I gonna pay Maya $140 when I got $90?
The Thai taxpayer, you don't pay a thing. You're
So
the
the-
Prime Minister. The Thai taxpayer
taxpayer is
writes
footing the
the
bill.
check. But again, the situation right now is
Very
such
clever.
that Prime Minister Ingluck, well, very clever till you get caught, and
That's
she
right.
got caught.
True.
Prime Minister Ingluck right now can't pay them, and that's why they're strong-arming banks that don't want to give the government loans because they strongly suspect they'll
Boy.
never see
Boy.
any of it repaid to pay off the farmers.
I mean,
and
this
that's
is
why
outrageous. This is just outrageous.
and that's why the Anti-Corruption Commission is probably going to indict her over the next few days. Will bring charges against her because it is so ridiculous.
But
It is
okay, so they
incompetent
bring
and
charges
corrupt.
against her, and then what? Is she out?
Well,
Is
that's
her power essentially stripped from her, they're putting someone
you're
else in
talking
place?
about a regime that doesn't necessarily care what the courts say.
Okay.
It's not like the United States. The United States, generally, if the Supreme Court makes a ruling, everybody says, okay, that's the ruling. The courts have said, the legislative branch, the executive branch. In Thailand, not necessarily the case. Right now, what's supposed to happen, if she has charges brought against her, she and her whole government are supposed to, they're supposed to go. She especially has to resign. But again, the suspicion will be, the suspicion is that what she will do is stay in Chiang Mai
In the
and
north.
probably just say, no, I'm still prime minister. I'll, in effect, she'll be prime minister in exile. She won't be working out of her, the right government
So what
buildings
is-
in Bangkok. She'll be in Chiang Mai.
But Kerry, you're
Northern Thailand.
describing a situation where Thailand is basically bifurcated and Chiang Mai becomes the Crimea of Thailand.
And that is talk that, again, you would not have heard 5 years ago very much, but now you're hearing more and more that the pro-government forces are saying, let's just break off the northern part or the northeastern part or both. And the pro-reform protesters are saying, good luck and good riddance if you want to do that. But neither solution's good. And the protesters, as much as they may have pure democracy in their hearts, that's what they want. They want a government that's not corrupt, or at least manageably corrupt, put it that way, and a government that really carries what we always like to think of as Jeffersonian or George Washington type democracy. The reality is they don't have any better solutions. The only good news lately in the past 15 hours, the opposition leader, the pro-reform protest leader, a gentleman named Sutep, has said for the first time that he's willing to talk to Ingluck. There's conditions, won't go into all that right now, it's another hour show. But there is some hope on the horizon, but it is increasingly dangerous. It's increasingly violent there, and it's increasingly divided. Hence, your division question is totally legitimate, and a question that wouldn't have even been seriously brought up 5 years ago.
Maya, you've been listening to Kerry through this show, and I'm kind of curious. Earlier in the program, I asked him about the potential for civil war in Thailand. What's your reaction to what you've heard him talk about? Do you have a do you have a different feeling, or do you see the potential for civil war in Thailand?
Well, I don't have firsthand experience, and I definitely don't have a fraction of the wealth of knowledge that you have, Kerry. I don't know. I mean, it's a very divisive, scary situation, and I have no idea what the prognosis might be, but I think civil war would put the entire area, that area of Asia, in a state of crisis, essentially.
I mean, what do you think now?
Thailand has been a model for us and for Asia
Yeah.
for
You're right.
democracy.
I mean, it's
Again,
been the
since
bastion of
1932.
democracy for...
The U.S. has had close relations.
Right, and there's some bad periods that no one talks about. The fact that they did in fact side with Japan during World War II.
Yeah,
And they've had some coups and military authoritarian rule for a while. But the reality is Thailand has been a role model. Economically, it's done wonderful things, ups and downs, of course. Politically, again, the democracy has been a role model. If it goes into civil war, it'd be hugely destabilizing. And again, it's one of our 5 treaty allies
Very
in the
important.
region. America then faces extremely serious challenges politically and militarily in the region if we have one of our allies in the middle of a civil war.
It'll be a
like
tough
this.
situation for Washington to lead from behind.
And from a business perspective, we do about 37 billion in trade each year with Thailand. So that trade that's disrupted, the American jobs, the 250,000 Thai jobs that the Department of State says are reliant on American investment, foreign direct investment, all that's jeopardized.
Okay, we are going to take a short commercial break here. We'll be back in just a moment. We're coming at you live from Pioneer Plaza here in the heart of downtown Honolulu. You're watching ThinkTech's Asian Review here, and I'm David Day. We'll see you on the other side of the break.
Aloha, I'm Maria Kashem of ThinkTech Hawaii, and I want to tell you about our ThinkTech talk shows. If you didn't know it, ThinkTech streams video and audio for all of its shows live on the internet from 2 to 5 p.m. every weekday afternoon, and we replay them all night long on ustream.tv. Visit thinktechhawaii.com for our live stream and YouTube links. Raise your awareness on ThinkTech. I'm Maria Kashem, and I'm
Jay Fidel. Aloha, I'm Jay Fidel of ThinkTech. We have some news for you. In addition to our ThinkTech TV show and our Asia in Review show on Olelo 54, as of January 1st, we're adding Community Matters to play also 2 hours a week. Check out thinktechhawaii.com for the specific times of each of these shows. We hope you enjoy all 3. Mahalo, I'm Jay Fidel.
We're back. You're watching Asian Review, and I'm your host, David Day, with my co-host, Maya Reid, and our special guest, Kerry Gershaneck, a senior associate with Pacific Forum CSIS, and a Bangkok protest witness from the streets of Bangkok, fresh with the smoke of battle all over him.
Yes.
So, Maya, where are we in the show?
So we're wrapping up now, and speaking of your firsthand experience with the protesters on the ground, seeing the violence and the protesters in person, what has been your experience? What has been your observations? And can we bring up picture number 3, please? Number 4, please.
Number 4.
Picture number 4 is of the so-called popcorn sniper in Thailand. We don't know if that is a posed picture, if that's real. It's ostensibly a real photo of someone who's taking shots, but we don't know if they're shooting at the protesters or doing counterfires against the people suspected to be either Khmers or police officers or some military officers taking shots at the protesters and killing the protesters. So we don't know the origin of that picture, but it highlights that violence is a major factor on a daily basis there. I don't feel like I was ever in any danger. So I won't say that I was not heroic in any way by being there. I was a witness. The people who go out there with their children every day, the ones who are there day and night living in tents to try to ensure the democracy of their country, they're the heroes. They're the ones whose lives are on the line because it's indiscriminate attacks. It's designed at each protest site to throw. It's not just throwing hand grenades anymore. It's lobbing them with M79 grenade launchers. It's shooting them 400 meters far away so no one can catch the shooter, and then killing the family of 3, the mother and the 2 children, killing the others in there just to terrorize them so they don't show up. The prognosis, what's going to happen, It is a good sign that Mr. Sutep has said, I'll talk now. But if he doesn't, if things don't come to the negotiating table very soon, and there's negotiations that have been going on, but they're very high-level people, but they've not been successful. So what you're going to see is increasing violence. The red shirts, the pro-government groups have called for a massive orgy of blood. They want to kill at least 500 protesters to cause a coup.
And is there going to be protection for the protesters?
There is.
As
The
they
Army
peacefully
is
protest?
protecting them. Not so much the police, but General Preut has made sure that the Army is, everyone knows the Army's there to protect them.
You know, Maya and Kerry, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I didn't mean to cut you off in mid-sentence, Kerry, but we're out of time here.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion with Kerry Gershaneck. You've been watching ThinkTech's Asian Review. I'm your host, David Day. Next week, same time, same place, we have got a most unusual program for you having to do with the new French leadership in global foreign policy. Yes, I know. Be here. It'll be very cool. Kerry, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Kapku for having me here, David and Maya, and I'm glad we were able to address the very potentially disastrous situation in Thailand, and everyone should pray for Thailand tonight that there is a peaceable resolution that maintains the democracy for Thailand.
It was a great discussion. Thank you so much.
All right.